good evening, depending on where you're joining from. I'm Reena Dayal, and I'm the host for the Thought Integrator podcast series. The series is focused on bringing the latest in science and technology related subjects to you in a language that most people who are science aware can understand. We are doing this because technology and science have been evolving at a very rapid pace, and they're impacting our lives in ways that we understand and ways in which everybody cannot understand, right? And so it's very important for all of us to be engaged in this dialogue and understand how technology impacts our life, the potential it has to make our lives better, but also the pitfalls that might be there, so that every person out there can play a role in a dialogue that emerges out of the conversation on how should technology be used for the betterment of humankind, and what are the kinds of checks and balances that we can put in place as we move forward. I'm very glad to have Dr. Rebecca Coates with us. Welcome, Rebecca. She is a sociologist with research interests in responsible innovation and applied ethics. Rebecca works at Australia's National Science Agency, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, CSIRO. In her work, Rebecca aims to understand how emerging technologies can be developed responsibly and ethically to ensure that transformative applications of new science are socially just and fair. Rebecca contributed to the World Economic Forum's Quantum Computing Governance Principles as a lead author, and so I had an opportunity to work with her there on that paper, and currently leads a project on the ethical implications of quantum computing for cybersecurity. So, very warm welcome to you, Rebecca, and I'm really excited to have this conversation, which is going to be focused on the topic of ethics in technology.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome, Dr. Dayal. It's really wonderful to join you this evening.
Thank you. So, before we jump into questions around ethics in technology, for the purpose of everybody who's listening to us and watching us or would be listening to us, tell us a little bit about who Rebecca Coates is and what, drew you to this topic of ethics in technology.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to share about my journey in social science and about my interests. So I'm based in Brisbane. Brisbane's a lovely river city in Queensland, in Australia. We're very fortunate here to have wonderful, nice weather. As you said in the introduction, I'm a research scientist at the CSIRO, and I haven't always had the opportunity to research on responsible innovation. Previously, my work was more around social stratification or social inequality. And I think one of the things that I always fed my interest in this was just trying to understand in our society in Australia how different people who seem to have the same opportunities ended up in different places in their life paths. And so I've always had a general interest about that. But aside from my research, my other general interests, I really love the environment and I love being outside in nature. And I think that's one of the reasons why now I'm so interested
After our painstaking analysis, we have determined that there is, in fact, zero tech news to be found in those new space.
Society and to the environment any way that I can. And having that deep respect and wanting to be kind to all people and to nature is what partly drives me. I'm also a very keen yogi. I've been practicing yoga in Australia now. I've been taught by a very good teacher for over 10 years. So they're the two things that really make up who I am, is my love of nature and my yoga practice.
Oh, that's wonderful. And just so you know, I practice yoga regularly as well. And
fantastic.
Under one teacher, but I've been doing variety of different yoga types and whatever seems to work for me at a particular time, but it's a consistent thing in my life. So I just love it when other people are doing the same thing. I just believe it's so powerful in terms of how it holistically impacts you as a person.
Absolutely.
Physical health,
Yeah, no, it does. And I've practiced a few different types at the moment. I'm really drawn to Kundalini yoga. I really, really, I love the approach. And yeah, I'm fortunate to be able to go to Kundalini Yoga School in Brisbane. There's not that many in Brisbane. Most people around Brisbane practice Hatha or Vinyasa. Obviously, I'm a novice compared to a lot of other people because it's only one part of my life, but it's still an important part. And yeah, I'd love to travel to India one day to go to an ashram or something like that. That would be one of my dreams.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing currently in this ethics area.
Yeah, so it's interesting how I came to start doing work on responsible innovation. So my first role in CSIRO was as a human research ethics coordinator. And I guess ethics is always something that has come almost naturally to me. I think partly due to my my upbringing, I was raised being to be very disciplined and to really think about the values that you bring into society and how you can contribute to society. And also going to university, studying sociology, which is based on philosophy. It's philosophy of society, and trying to dig deeper into about those ethical principles there. But in terms of the work I'm doing now, so my work as an ethicist as such grew out of those my early tertiary studies and then my work as an ethics coordinator. And I started to really notice the gaps in how we do research ethics in particular, but even more broadly, where we have principles in Australia and internationally about how we can do research with humans, and they're very based on principles such as respect and justice and beneficence and research merit and integrity, at least in the ones in Australia. But they only say that they apply to certain institutions like universities or places that are government funded, for example, in Australia. But as we know, there's research conducted by lots of different people. And even outside of research, technology is being developed. And there's not overarching ethical guidelines or practices that can be enforced or that have triggers to keep people in line, so to speak. So that's where my interest grew to think about, well, how can we develop responsible innovation as a practice? And a lot of the early literature in responsible innovation came from the European Commission, where they tried to implement that as broad policy frameworks that's sort of become influential in Australia. So one of the projects I work on is about the public perceptions of responsible innovation. And the reason why that's an important topic, as you talked about in your introduction, was engaging in a dialogue with society. And so that project where we've asked people in Australia in a survey what responsible innovation means to them. So rather than scientists saying, well, this is what responsible innovation is, it means there's different dimensions that the literature talks about, such as being inclusive or having a dialogue or being responsive to society. We're going and asking people, well, how does that fit with your worldviews and your values and how you see technology developing? And that project is multi-year longitudinal, so that means we'll be asking the same people the same questions or similar questions again over this year and maybe another year. And it's been a process where we've worked on with members of the public as well to design the survey questions. So often when social scientists do surveys, they rely on the literature to form those questions, but you can do what is more called like a co-design process, where you engage people even in the designing of the research tools. So that's what we've been doing in that project. The other work I'm doing is around quantum computing, and that's been really, really interesting and amazing to work on. So as Rena said, I was involved in the World Economic Forum governance principles. where I was able to bring my perspective on applied ethics and on sociology to that document. And the current project I'm working on, though, is looking specifically on cybersecurity. So I'm working with a wonderful group of researchers in Data 61 and CSIRO to understand what are the current critical ethical issues and risks that quantum computing poses to cybersecurity, and what are people's current level of awareness. So that's my two things. I can talk more about them if there's some in particular things there that you're interested in.
I think that's wonderful. I think it's a wonderful introduction to the areas that you're working on, and they touch. What you're doing touches a wide variety of topics, and the fact that you come from a sociology background actually is extremely important, because I think technologists have a certain viewpoint about these things. But at the end, when we're talking about an impact to larger society, we need people from a sociology background like you to be bringing in perspective. And therefore, my first question regarding this to you is in terms of what are some of the biggest challenges that you see in terms of technology adoption by society, and, taking it from a positive angle right now, saying, do you see any challenges in technology adoption, and how can they impact the future of this conversation?
Yeah, I think the main challenges I see from a sociological perspective is issues related to justice, and to put that in more equally accessible terms, access and fairness to the technology. So for something like quantum computing technology, I think it won't, from my understanding, in the development, it may not be accessible to all people or all sectors across society straight away or equally. A bit like how when the internet arrived, only a few people had it, or mobile phones. But one of the challenges of that is whilst it will bring great opportunities and abilities for scientists and companies and governments to do things better and faster, basically, it will also accelerate any existing inequalities potentially in society. And one thing that could stop that then, if we talk perhaps too much about the potential problems, is a fear of the technology due to what some scientists will call hype or overhype. So in the artificial intelligence or AI history, I have read recently about the AI winter, and you're probably familiar with this, where people initially were saying, or the scientists, that it wouldn't be possible. And so funding was withdrawn and scientists stopped sort of working on it because they thought, it's too hard, it's too complex. And so people could get, a bit afraid of it. We don't want to impede on the technology's development, but at the same time, we want to make sure it's done in a way that's fair and equitable. So I think they're my two biggest challenges is, if you could say it in a nutshell, awareness, public awareness. And by public, I don't mean just the general community, I mean everybody. So all the stakeholders in what we might call the community, and I'm talking about quantum computing, but that can be applied to other emerging technologies as well. So it's CEOs of companies, it's small businesses, it's families, people who use those services. Everyone needs to have the right kind of awareness for their position in society. So obviously a CEO needs different tools to decide whether to employ that technology in their business comparison to an individual who's using the technology. And that's where that fairness and equitability challenge can come into it.
True. I think the tools need to be very different for different type of consumers of the technology and the decision makers as well. You touched a little bit about AI and how we had an AI winter, and then we saw movement. We are seeing movement forward again, and then this whole conversation in the past decade or so has been around some very prominent people talking about how almost ringing the alarm bell, saying that if you have artificial general intelligence, and then how is that intelligence going to behave in a certain manner, and is that a threat to humanity? And on the other hand, if you're a technologist and if you're working in the field, you look at the development of the technology, you realize that you're really far away from what is a true AGI. And then, this conversation is a little bit more hyped up, and you want to make sure that the potentials of AI are, really leveraged, and we don't get lost in this whole alarm bell situation. But at the same time, as technology advances, especially with quantum coming in, some of these things may become reality. And then the question is, how do you prevent people with maleficent intent possibly, develop this technology in a manner which is not how everybody else is perceiving it to be done? So as an ethicist, how do you, what are the kind of discussions that you have around this topic? How do you approach this? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question, because one thing I learned from the process that we worked on together in the World Economic Forum was that these are really real concerns, and people are coming from this topic from different perspectives and angles. And people who work on new technologies such as quantum or AI, most of them have devoted their life to this science, and then to have people saying that that's bad, can put them on the wrong side. And one thing I've found in my work as an ethicist and giving people ethics advice is that often people aren't trying to do that, like most people. It's the unintended impacts of what can be done with that technology where people don't look at that because they're so focused on making the algorithm better or applying it in the right context or building a new platform, for example. And that's such a big job. Like we talk about these things like they're easy, but they're huge. And so you need someone sometime to go, well, hey, look at it from this perspective. If you do this, you can have this unintended outcome. And often when you have those discussions, there's a way, there's a solution to build in a stage gate or a safeguard or a barrier or something into their technology if it's just made apparent to them, to scientists. And so I learned a lot from you, Reena, from what I've heard on your open innovation argument, and I think that's really part of that, the key. So it's about building a culture of open innovation and a dialogue between ethicists and social scientists, end users and technology developers to identify those unintended outputs, because people will often argue that the technology itself isn't the problem, it's how it is used, and that's where we can have those that's where we can find real innovation, I think. But in terms of also, I thought a lot about this, about how you might avoid nefarious use of new technologies and critical technologies that have great power to do good things for society, but potentially harmful things. And I don't think I can really speak with a lot of authority about that, but I do think from what I've read, open innovation and collaboration is a key to doing that. So trying to make the playing field more even, so people aren't trying to become dominant with a certain technology for whatever reason.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that answer from you.
Yes.
I have been, pushing for open innovation in the quantum space as well, and I do believe that it's the belief that in when we look at people in volumes, people are generally good. So if you make everything accessible to a larger set of people, chances are there are more good intentioned people in the ecosystem than there are bad players. And hence there is an opportunity for us to do correction through the power of the collective, rather than just, individual people, in silos trying to do that work. So, and I think that approach has worked quite well in the cybersecurity space, where there's a lot more collaboration, etc. And a lot of open platforms which have been systematically promoted in the last couple of decades, which has helped rein in some of the negative forces in the cybersecurity space, people who hack into systems and things like that. And of course, it's a regular struggle, but I think innovation and open innovation has played a pretty significant role in that field as well. Yeah,
and I agree. I think having to me, I see those open conversations between technologists and scientists and researchers and ethicists is like the seed of open innovation. That's where it has to start, by just having conversations and building common language. It's one thing I have found in working with multidisciplinary teams is the starting point has to be a common language and a common understanding or a common goal. And often we are talking about the same thing, but we use different words. Even something as simple as in social research methods, we talk about variables. Some people might call them columns or different things, because they come from a different perspective on it. And but we're all trying to achieve the same end goal. And I like your approach too, to think about that people, if you start from the point of people are inherently good or have good intent, and then you can build more positive impact from that.
So when you look at this area of ethics in technology in general, where do you see the maximum work happening today? If you look at your peers and people around you, which area is ethics a bigger conversation right now, bigger efforts happening for what technology?
I feel like there's real momentum around the ethics of artificial intelligence and AI and machine learning at the moment. That could just be because of the people I'm around, but that's where I feel like there's a lot more conversation. I would like there to be more debate around ethics of quantum computing, and that's what I'm trying to work on. But when I looked at the literature with my team, there's not a lot on ethics of quantum computing. There is some out there, obviously, but just definitely not as much as ethics of artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think there was a paper written a few years ago that sort of collated all the ethics AI codes in the world. There was 84 or some number like that. So lots of different companies and universities and institutions are developing their own codes, which I think shows two things. It shows a sign of the maturity of the field. People are realizing that they do need to put safeguards in place, but also I think that's pressure from society and from funding bodies and end users to show that they're taking into consideration people's well-being or values in how it's used, because there has unfortunately been a lot of negative media attention over the past, we can all think of examples 5 years or so where artificial intelligence hasn't been used ethically. And so that's where I think, and if to make it more specific, I think around there's always a lot of news on facial recognition and the use of artificial intelligence and surveillance and the huge impacts that can have on our lives and society. There's a lot of debate around that, particularly in Australia. There's been some things lately. Yeah. Would you agree, or would you see a different area?
I would agree. I do believe that AI, the conversation is it's deep and it's very widespread. I also believe that it has happened post facto, in the sense that we've seen some instances and the technology has been maturing over a period of time, but the conversation started happening much later. And the fact that we are already discussing ethics in quantum is in a little bit more early stage, I think is a little encouraging, but it needs to be momentum is what I feel. And the ethics conversation in AI is so popular that I'll give you an example. So I remember once I was working on, and this was with a group of volunteers, we were working on a facial recognition technology using the, and we were trying to work on a use case. And there are a couple of really young people, right? 2 years experience, 5 years experience, who were, tech geeks, but they came to me, separately, and they said, we don't want to work on this project. And I was very curious, and it made me really happy that both of them were very aware of the fact the kind of impact that facial recognition could create. And they told me, I don't care who we create this for. If we create this for what seems like benign actors today, how do you know that it will not be misused tomorrow? Because we cannot guarantee. There is no, I think the words that they used was that there is no limit to human greed and a lust for power, right? And I was, almost taken aback, because a part of me did not expect a conversation of that kind with people who've just started their career in the first decade of their career. But I was also very, very, there's a part of me which was very happy that this debate is happening. I do feel that they were a little misguided, because at the end of the day, 2 people deciding, 5 people deciding, 20 people deciding, and not taking the technology forward is not the solution, because we know that there are others who will take it forward. And if there are people with good intentions, I would encourage them to actually take the technology forward in the way that they want to take it forward, because then they create a positive impact, rather than removing yourself from the problem, because that doesn't bring a solution. You just remove yourself from the equation, from the problem, right? So that's what I spend a lot of my time telling people. But then what it shows me is that the conversation is rampant, it's widespread, and at least a lot of technically aware people are becoming more and more conscious about this issue of ethics in AI, at least. And I believe there is an opportunity to use that as a board that can push the conversation for ethics in other topics also, because of the momentum that has been created.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right, because now that even ethics is something that people were wanting to talk about, I think there would have been a time when people didn't want to talk about ethics, and even I think there are still some sections in the innovation system or people who aren't that keen because they see it as something negative or holding back the development. But now that there is more momentum and people are saying that they need to have these discussions, they need to think about it, otherwise there may not be the uptake that they desire. It puts more emerging technologies like quantum computing at an advantage, and that was one of the things that we worked on with the document, and acknowledged that it's a great opportunity to be at this stage in the development or innovation pathway, where we can try and put things in place now. So rather than some negative things happen, or we can guide the innovation in a way that has the most benefit to the most people.
Sure, absolutely. And I was thinking, do you see some topics within the ethics conversation that you believe should be happening but are not happening now? Is there something that you feel is missing in the conversations?
That's a really good question. The thing that I would like to see more of, and I guess it does come from my interest in public perceptions, is to have a broader social discussion, so that we don't unintentionally create our own echo chambers as such in our scientific communities. So I think that's why programs such as what you're doing here, and other things where we're trying to bring people together to have discussions are important. So I think it's really, really hard. Something I was actually thinking about today was how to ask the general public about ethics, to ask them, do you think research is ethical? because in responsible innovation literature, we talk about having an open dialogue and having discussions between science and society, for example. But science is so full of jargon, and some of the things in new critical technologies are it's advanced, and trying to have a discussion to distill down the essence of what you're trying to find out is quite a skilled activity. So I think actually that probably I've answered a bit more of the question there. One thing I think needs to have more attention is on capacity building and capability building of next generation scientists, so that they're able, like the people you spoke about then, that said they don't want to work in the technology. I think building in ethics of technology and social science research methods into computer science courses, for example, or even physics. So it's something that's just part of the foundation of people who are developing new technology of their studies, will help the next generation, so that you really can have ethics by design built in. So it won't have to be like an add-on or a post-technology development sort of thing. It has to be fixed as such. But that's a pretty big ask, though, because people are drawn to particular disciplines because they've got particular worldviews and personality characteristics and ways of seeing the world. And so not everyone is interested in talking with other people. There's it's actually really funny. People think that sociologists like talking to people, and I do. But I've met plenty of sociologists who just want to look at data sets and code and don't actually want to talk to people. So, we have to be careful not to try and make a scientist into like a jack of all trades, or like someone who's like a trick doing everything. So you can either have these people with really diverse skill sets, or that work really well together in teams, like to bring everyone together. But I think just as a basic thing, having some more capacity in future next generation will be really important. Yeah, so that's to answer your question more succinctly. I think what I think is missing is the public voice, and also discussion around skill sets. So when we say ethics, when we say social science, realizing that those are actually real skills that you can develop. And I like to think about it like an ethical muscle that you need to exercise. So when I've talked to non-social scientists in the past about ethics, is the more you think about it, the more you talk about it, the more you sort of ping that interest, you will get stronger in that area. And so that's what I think.
That's very valuable. And I really, I think building the ethics muscle, I think that's a wonderful concept. I also really like the recommendation that you made when you talked about how, ethicists or sociologists should, be part of this, how do you initiate dialogue with the general public, and how technologists and the sociologists can work together. And it reminded me of the fact of how the product development discipline on the technology front has changed over a period of time. There used to be a time where it was only engineers and maybe some MBAs who were really involved in getting the market insights, etc. Today, when market research is done for products, there are anthropologists, sociologists, and psychologists, all part of the team that works on the concept and design of the product, and designers as well. So already multidisciplinary efforts are happening. And from a product engineering discipline perspective, I think it would be a lot easier for them to introduce a sociologist into the conversation from an ethics perspective and initiate that dialogue with the public. So it's definitely possible from a product design perspective. The question is, what is the incentive for the companies that are working on tech products to be doing this upfront? Because it's a cost, and how do we motivate them to do this? Plus the general issue of how do you even, I still see one thing as a barrier, the fact that you talked about how science and technology is full of jargons, and how do you bring the conversation to a level where you can explain what you see as the possibilities of the technology to a common person without unnecessarily alarming them in any way, or giving a false picture which is very rosy. So how do you strike that balance? And I think I sort of agree with you that that's the biggest concern, but I really love the idea that you sparked off by talking about these multiple disciplines working together, something I'm sure of the product groups across tech companies need to look at. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, that's good.
The other thing that I was thinking about is, I know you said that quantum is something where you feel more of a conversation should happen. In the past, do you feel, when you look at the history of technology, do you see, any technologies which you felt there should have been a much more ethics-based conversation, but somehow it did not happen at the right time? Or, past or current, any technologies that you feel very strongly about in this area?
That's a good question. I think, apart from the obvious one of AI, I don't have a lot of expertise in other technologies, so I would just be saying from my personal perspective, I think plastic use. Like, I know there's a lot of companies right now, even like CSIRO is looking at the use of single-use plastics, and I haven't studied this, so I'm saying this purely based on my own perspective. I often wonder about that. I often wonder, did the person who made plastic think that it would be as huge a problem as it is now? And I don't think they would have. And I think at the time we didn't have the communication possibilities like we have now. Like, even the fact that we're having this discussion in 2 different continents and different time zones, that was not possible. And so the use of single-use plastics grew so slowly and has so many good applications, but also I really wish that was something that had more foresight, really. And that's something that academics talk a lot about in responsible innovation research, is the power and the necessity for foresight. There's probably other technologies that I'm less aware of, but that's one thing, because now it is such a huge problem, and countries all over the world are trying to grapple with it. And I often think, as a consumer, as an individual, you try so hard, but it's so infiltrated into every aspect of our lives that makes it very hard to not use plastic. But yeah, that is one that I think about a lot.
I think that's a great example, and I sort of agree with you that probably the kind of communication mechanisms, the kind of conversations around, how do you use technology for the benefit and not to harm, not for harm, or look at the potential harms. I don't even think the discipline was as advanced at that time in terms of the kind of conversations that would have happened, right? So so I think that's a great example. Could you share some examples of how technology and its impact on society is such a critical topic? And I know you talked about facial recognition and then the use of plastic. I think that's great. Do any other examples come to mind?
In terms of like impacts on society? No, that's a good. I think all technology has the possibility to, by its nature, have huge impacts on society. I think telecommunications, or the way we communicate, has one of the biggest impacts on society. And the other ones, I guess, is related to that is social media, which I know is made up of all different types of technology. But anything that impacts the way we conduct ourselves or interact with other people has huge impacts, and social media is definitely one of those ones. Like, it's changed the way the younger generation talk. Like, I had to explain to my son the other day of what the phone was on his mobile device. He was so used to using social media platforms to communicate with friends, and if I'd say, just call me, he couldn't figure out what I meant. Like, he's only young. But so he doesn't even have that memory of a home phone. I don't know if you have that same saying in India, that the corded phone that everyone used to have, the home phone. No one really has that in Australia much, and so all our language around phones are connected to the home phone. Like, you pick up a call or hang up. All of those things come from the old technology. That's probably not the greatest answer for your question.
But that's a great example. I was reminded of, those floppy disks that used to be there earlier. I remember there was I don't know whether I saw it on a joke or was it an actual thing, that some of the current generation has never seen that floppy disk, like the small disk. So when they saw one, they said, "Oh, somebody 3D printed the save icon."
That's right.
so I think, there's a memory associated with technology, and things are progressing at such a fast rate that things are becoming obsolete very fast as well. So that connection with technology, and then you and I are having this conversation about how the phone or the social media has impacted social media has impacted people's lives. But if you look at the current generation, they don't know anything before that, right? And so for them, that's the way civilization exists, right? So it's just amazing how much of a transformation technology causes and we just get thrown into it, right? I mean, I think what worries me is that somehow it is, largely more positive than negative. But we've seen both positive and negative ramifications of how these technologies impact our lives. And it's more of we getting thrown into it, right? And we just start accepting what is there. There's no conversation, there's no dialogue, there is no, it's all passive. It's not like an active engagement to decide what you really want your life to look like as you move forward, right? So I think...
exactly. I think... That is another thing I think about a lot is conscious consumerism, and that is one thing that really does concern me about the internet, is that it's so integrated into our lives. And so when more powerful computers come along, like quantum computing, a lot of people get left behind. Like, older generations still use telephones to call people and stuff like that. And surprisingly, even though I have all these research interests on emerging technologies, I'm quite technology adverse in my private life. Like, I don't use social media. I still write letters to my friends. I like to do things more slowly, and it's because I think I'm aware of how much it impacts on people that I just prefer to just do things slowly and have human connection, and I just think it's so overwhelming as well. Like, I find the amount of information that's presented at us today, and because as a sociologist I was trained to critically understand and interpret information, and so when I'm fed with all the information that you have online in advertisement and social media, I'm constantly trying to analyze it, and it's just too much for my brain. So you have to be a passive consumer, and I don't want that. So I'm very careful with how I consume it. I know in Australia children are being taught cybersecurity in school now, and another funny anecdote, like from my son again, I notice all of his friends, when they chat online, have all these funny names. And I'm like, why don't you just put your name there? And he's like, don't be silly, Mum. I would never actually put my real name online. Like, no one does that. So they've got a whole
more aware than us, actually, in that sense.
Yeah, I think so. I was surprised. So, and with the use of social media too, I guess, one of the main concerns I have with that is the use of big data, and that we have so much data collected about us, but every aspect of people's lives that's never been seen before, and that's often used unethically by research organisations outside of universities and places where they have to have ethics review. So that facial recognition is one way they can use that, but they use it for lots of different purposes, and that's a great concern to me. But it's almost impossible to control the data about yourself these days. I once met someone at a conference who asked me as a challenge, have you tried to eradicate Google from your life? And I said, no, I haven't. I don't think it would be possible. And so I didn't mean to talk about specific companies. But she was making the point to me about, trying to control your online presence. Mm-hmm. And she said it's nearly impossible. And when I thought about it, I thought, well, you're actually right, because we take it for granted. We take it for granted that there's something that's for free, but it's not really. And unfortunately, there's some people who get more impacted by that. I saw on the news actually recently in Australia a study that looked at cybersecurity crime during the pandemic in Australia, and it found that people who are more vulnerable and from more disadvantaged parts of society were far more impacted by cybersecurity crime. During the pandemic, lots of people were at home, not going out, and so it was the perfect opportunity to be targeted online. I think that's a really good example of how all different types of technologies can conglomerate together and actually increase the disadvantage that was already existing. So people who are less familiar with technology, can't spot cyber criminals, were taken advantage of.
Yeah, I think that pretty much happened worldwide, and I think there were a lot of cases in India as well. It's, not everybody is able to differentiate phishing attacks, especially because they were happening through very non-traditional channels as well. I think there were attacks through WhatsApp as well. And lots of different channels were being used, and it's difficult for everybody to keep up with that, especially, and I'm kind of glad to see that the younger generation is already getting schools, colleges about how to be more cyber safe. I have a similar experience with my son, where he's the first one who he doesn't just have double password protection, he actually has 3 levels of protection. And, he uses pseudonyms everywhere. And he actually looks at us and the way we work, and I'm a technologist, right? So he can't, I'm constantly like on this, I have to be better than him, right? Because all the experiences that I have, it's good to see that they are learning fast. And but having said that, it's still a very small section of the society, right? I mean, that's not true for all the schools and colleges. It's maybe happening more for certain colleges and schools. I don't. The schools in India are giving cybersecurity education. So the real need is to bridge that gap and get everybody on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That brings us to the last segment about the future, right? What do you think about it? What do you think is the single most important thing that is required to spread the message? You've already said that we need to reach out to society, and you've given a couple of ideas, but what would be the single most powerful thing we could do? I think to change the future, so to say.
Yes, I think open dialogue and discussion. And so I choose the word dialogue very intentionally, because dialogue means a back and forth between different parties in society. And I think when you spoke earlier about trying to raise awareness or general knowledge about new emerging technologies, one of the ways that scientists have done this with other technologies such as genetically modified technologies, or GM, for example, or nanotechnology, is to have sort of educational videos, also different formats. So it might be a video or a comic or something like that, and accessible language in local languages if necessary, if there's different languages, and then have discussions around that. So people can ask questions, and both scientists, if it's scientists, or if it's policymakers or teachers, people who are designing education programs, they can learn from each other. And so part of having that open dialogue is about people wanting to learn. So not just the scientists going and thinking that they already know everything, but going with an open mind. And then that open dialogue, so with people in society, as we talked about earlier, it spreads all through the whole ecosystem. So right up to governments and heads of states, CEOs, small businesses, that we don't want them to fall through the cracks. And I think that can be a problem in some social structures where new technology can evolve really quickly, and then the small players who perhaps don't have the infrastructure or the huge number of employees to develop, technology departments or something. They might just get sold something by a salesperson. They also need to be part of that conversation. So that's what I would say would be an open dialogue, and putting time. That means time and resources, though, and so that needs to be built into research and built into technology development as a key part of that journey throughout the journey. So it happens at the beginning, during, and also after. And that's why it should be a dialogue.
So almost like a complete process transformation across the ecosystem to enable that.
Yes. Yeah, because that's how we can. That's how I believe we can have responsible innovation, and how we can have ethical innovation, because then people are being transformed through that process and you're also pacing the technology, so it slows it down for sure. But I think pacing is really important. So rather than a big rush, being like, well, let's take some time with this, and then you can, I believe, have better outcomes through that process for everybody involved, and a more holistic view of what that technology does. So rather than just coming out with a new tool, for example, or a new platform or a new technology, you've actually identified how it can transform something, whether it's a new add-on for a software, or if it's something bigger, like it can transform people's relationship with each other, or the environment, or their mode of transport, or whatever. And so you have a broader understanding of how that technology fits into society by going through that process.
I think that's wonderful. I also wanted to, sort of, since you talked about, I noticed that you talked about how, channels for communicating and engaging the society, larger society, in a dialogue. And I was wondering, what do you think about science fiction historically? How that has played a role, and do you think we can leverage that in some way to take this conversation forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Actually, I know you mentioned it a while ago. I think that's brilliant, because it can engage people across different generations, and often it's, I think, how people learn about things. It's entertaining, and it can actually stem or pique interest in people, and it can involve lots of different people. Like you can have young or new filmmakers, for example, making science fiction or writing about science fiction, And even if, say, a scientist is writing science fiction, which I think more scientists should do, I was actually reading about science communication and came across an author in my local area recently who had decided to do narrative writing. Mm-hmm. And she spoke about how much it changed her work because she was able to communicate it, and she saw it, what she was doing, which was, some biology or something, very, very differently. Mm-hmm. And so learning some creative writing skills, that's actually, it just reminded me, there's been times, when like all people do in academia, you question your journey because this can be quite hard at times. And creative writing was another thing I thought that I might do. And I thought I should do a creative writing course anyway, because then you can learn how to communicate a lot better. So I think that science fiction is a great idea. And, the only thing is, I was going to say, as long as it's factual, I think that's really important because we don't want to over-generate hype. It's like making sure it's balanced. But you can think about movies like, is it Galactica? I remember watching that in sociology of technology in my undergraduate. And these are like dystopian ideas of new technology, but they can really generate some discussion. There's definitely place for that, and hopefully creative industries, like I know with COVID in Australia, they've really suffered. Hopefully with some rescue packages and post-pandemic support, they can start to get up on their feet a bit more and put some more collaboration with scientists.
Yeah, so as part of the efforts of the dialogues that we did, as part of QATCI, we did some dialogues a while ago. One of the topic of one of the roundtables was science fiction and its impact on innovation. And we had a multidisciplinary group. We had authors, we had people from the industry, people from the academia, scientists, a very diverse group which was there on the table. And I think we actually came out with a report at the end of it, which has recommendations for the Ministry of Culture as well as of Science and Technology.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
And I think the summary of the discussion, everybody felt that one of the very powerful means of communicating technology to the general public was, and for spurring imagination and for ecosystem for more innovation to happen, was through science fiction. So we didn't the topic of ethics in technology or responsible innovation. The focus was more on how do you instill more creativity about complex subjects, right? And how encourage more people to take up topics which or subjects which are going to lead in a certain direction. And I think included in science fiction is one of the levers for doing that. We found some correlation between science fiction and progress across different timelines and in different geographies, and we felt that an important part of the ecosystem. While we are having this conversation now, I'm thinking that maybe it has a role to play in spreading the message for responsible innovation as well. As long as it is the right kind of creativity is applied, and we extrapolate science but not fantasize it. And
yes, that's right. I think that's a great idea because you can play out different scenarios very easily that way as well. Like you can display how an ethical decision-making process might occur in a research or innovation context or in a use of a new technology. And you can also play out different scenarios of what success or good outcomes or bad outcomes could be. I feel like I'm using very broad language because I don't really like saying good and bad because I think they're very subjective terms, but you know what I mean? Like, good outcomes for some people, bad outcomes for others. So I think that's a really great idea. And I have to look and see if there's any such initiatives in Australia. I don't know that there is, but I could be wrong.
Yes. So I'm getting a message. My connection is unstable. Let me just try and see if I can so that I'm audible clearly. But we have or we could just go ahead. There is one final question left.
Sure.
Could you tell us a little bit about what does, where you are today and the kind of research that you're doing? What does the academic path look like? And not just the path that you took, what are the various possible paths that could be there? And, I've been doing this section for almost all my interviews and conversations, because I feel people, want to understand how to, follow a particular path, and we want to lay out possible options for them. So what did your journey look like from an education perspective, and what are the various other possibilities?
I think I'm really happy to talk about this topic because, again, it is something that I've shared with my students. Before I worked at CSIRO, I used to teach social research methods, and I worked at a couple of different universities. So it is something I think about a lot. So I come from a really non-traditional university background. I'm the first person in my immediate family to go to even finish high school or secondary and to go to university. And I think part of the reason why I did that was from encouragement from my family, but also I was born at a time in Australia where finishing high school was almost mandatory to do that, and there's lots of government support for people to do. And when I finished high school, I actually didn't even think about going to university. I worked in hospitality as a baker because I didn't know what else to do, and I really wanted to do something with my hands, and it enabled me to go hiking. So I used to spend most of my time outdoors in nature. But then I started to really wonder a lot more about the rest of the world. And someone said to me one day, when are you going to university? Because I had all these questions, and I thought, I actually hadn't even thought about going to university because it seemed like such a challenge to get there. I thought, how will I afford it, and how will I get work, etc. But once I had that seed of idea in there, I thought, that's what I really want to do. And so I first thought I will go and study anthropology. I ended up in sociology. So I studied a Bachelor of Arts with a double major in sociology. And because I was working, it took me a little bit longer, but I liked having, again, that pace, because it gave me some more time to think about it and more time to put to my studies. And because I had to support myself through university, I didn't have the normal, I guess, university life that a lot of students have where they're socializing a lot. I was working very, very hard to finish. But then once I started, I loved it so much. It was like I had found my passion and my place in the world. I loved being at university and studying, and I couldn't get enough of it. And so I did I studied for my honours degree, which in Australia it's like a small thesis, a 12,000 word thesis by research. And then I was accepted into the PhD program, so the doctoral program, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship and a living stipend. That was amazing because it enabled me to focus on my research and my PhD and develop my academic career. So at that time, I thought I was going to be an academic. I put all of my energies into to teaching, to doing research assistant work, and to writing my thesis. And it took me a while to finish my thesis because during that time I started a family and do other things that people do around that age. And but when I finished it, I found academic life to be very, very demanding and extremely competitive in Australia. And as a young mother, I just didn't have the time to work as many long hours as all the other academics. So eventually, after several years of teaching, I loved teaching, and working as a postdoctoral research fellow, I decided to look at what else I had in my skill set. And I knew I was a very good writer because that's what I love doing. And I still do read a lot. And that was some of the good advice I got, was that if you want to be a good writer, you should also read a lot. I knew I was a good critical thinker, and I had some good social science research skills. And I found the job at CSIRO as an ethics coordinator. And research ethics was something I'd always been interested in. I, as I said earlier, had a natural interest, and so I've done that job now for 5 years, and also found that I couldn't let go of research, and opportunities came up for me to keep doing it alongside my ethics role, which was only part-time, which again was helpful for raising a family. But now that I have more, less demands at home, I'm able to work full-time now in research. So I guess that's, in terms of educational pathway, it has been, it looks pretty standard, but I feel like it's anything but, because I really had to forge my way to be able to have what I feel is a really privileged position. I don't at all take it for granted. I've also just kept on trying to learn. I've done lots of additional courses along the way. And one of the things I feel really strongly about is having empirically informed research. So I'm an empirical scientist. All of the things that I research about is based on data of some kind. So some, social sciences or arts or humanities aren't based on empirical work or real data, but I feel really strongly about that. So having that skill set of so quantitative, so using survey data and such, and also qualitative, so interviews with people, gives me a really diverse perspective on things. Like some people in sociology would be one or the other, and they would only see the social world through that particular lens. But I think that really limits how you understand society. So I take a mixed methods approach. I think that's the way I've done things.
That's great. It's very empowering to, I'm sure for people who are looking at their careers to know about your journey. And I think the fact that you supported your university education yourself, and you took the time, juggled around different aspects of your life, I think that's really powerful. It's important. I personally believe in balance, and I think for anybody who is striving for balance, that's how life is. It's not just everything is not a straight line. It's how you manage different things at different times in your life so that you are satisfied in a sense that only you uniquely understand, right? As opposed to how others may perceive their lives to be proceeding. So
I think that's a really good point too. Yeah. So I just wanted to add too, because I often used to look at my peers and think, they're so much more further ahead of me in terms of, because in academia you get really on this sort of treadmill of trying to be the best of something and I've really, really stopped that now. I think I just want to do the best I can in my domain and my area, and see because that's the best contribution you can make, I think, is that way, is make your own path, and not worry if it's different from other people's. And if you've got a passion or a curiosity about something, talk to other people. Like there's been key mentors along my path that I'm extremely grateful for, like without them, and they've been at different stages of my career, in my undergraduate study, in my postgraduate studies, when I was an academic, and then also now at CSIRO, I've had mentors that have helped me along the way. And that's partly also why I like teaching and talking to people, because I really feel that it's important to give back.
Sure. And you talked about, capacity expansion for scientists. And I was just thinking that even for people who are like engineers or working in technology, exposure to subjects which are related to sociology would be a great thing, because I went and did some courses online because I was trying to reach out to the society. through some of these dialogues. And I'm like, there must be a subject around it. And I found out computational social science, and I did a few courses in that online. It has been pretty
fantastic
for me, right? And I was just thinking, if more people could be studying this while they study computer science, it would just be wonderful, right? So I think there's a capacity required for on the other side, the pure tech people as well.
Absolutely. And like, I know there is one school in a university in Australia who's now making a new degree, a new faculty that brings together ethics and humanities and science to try and create a new generation. But if you don't need that necessarily though as well. Like there's so many online courses offered by large institutions, large universities, or I think students could lobby their faculties and say we want this included as part of our degree because it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Somebody who does computer science can also, in their masters, let's say, do undergrad computer science degree, theoretically also, take a few pool electives which are more towards sociology and topics of ethics, and then make a pivot later in their career towards ethical technology, ethical uses of technology, and go deeper into that. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if they can get credits for their degree, so it's not that they will put more effort into it, and it will hopefully change or impact on their worldview. And that's one great thing I learned through that sociology teaches you is to understand how, as our ontology or the way we see the world, how does that impact what we do and how we think and how we know about the world. That's philosophy, and that's a really deep critical reflection, but I love it, and I think it's really important.
Great. It has been so great talking to you, Rebecca, I think, and a lot of really nice nuggets for people who are and will be listening to this. So thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you all the best in your journey for being very active in the ethics in technology, playing a key role there, and I look forward to collaboration as well with you.
Me too. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Reena. It was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.